How to get your podcast on Apple Podcasts. Now, this is a common question we receive at Ginni Media. And why is Apple Podcasts so important in the grander scheme of the distribution apps? Well, there's a few things. Firstly, why are podcasts called podcasts? Here's some trivia for you. In 2001, the iPod first came out. So in 2004, the first podcast was released. The word podcast actually comes from the words iPod and broadcast. So wrap your head around this. The word podcast actually exists because of Apple. And this is the reason why they also have almost 70% of the podcast listener share. That's a ton of listeners, isn't it? A whole heap. So if you are releasing a podcast, the first app you want to be on is Apple Podcasts. Here's a few other things that you need to get your podcast onto that particular app. Number one, you need podcast cover art. This is essentially like the front cover of your podcast. If your podcast were a book, this would be what catches people's attention, the very image that summarizes the essence of your podcast, and the title that is short but catchy, but does encapsulate what you're going to be talking about every single episode. When you're designing this cover, it has to be at a 1-to-1 ratio, meaning it has to start at 1400 by 1400 pixels, and the maximum is 3000 by 3000 pixels. When you submit this to iTunes, this is a way to get your podcast on the app. The second thing that you need is obviously an episode. So this is an episode that includes an intro and outro to your podcast, the actual episode recording. So it could be a conversation, a solo episode. You need this episode to activate the third thing you need to be on Apple Podcasts, which is an RSS feed. An RSS feed can only be live and valid if there is content that the feed detects. So that content is generally an episode. So some people like to use a trailer episode or what you call a dummy episode, which is like putting the intro or a music track on your RSS feed, because this way when Apple Podcast detects it, it can validate the RSS feed because there's something on there. So that's the third thing you need, an RSS feed. The last thing that you need is a verified Apple account. Now, what do I mean by verified? You don't have to have a blue tick next to your name. That's not what I mean. What I mean is you need an iTunes/Apple account that has a credit card attached to it. Apple needs to know you're an actual person that's submitting a podcast. So when you do create an Apple account, make sure you add in your billing address, your credit card details. So when you go to podcastconnect.com, you use those very same logins to log into your Apple Podcast dashboard. These are the 4 things you need to get your podcast onto the Apple Podcast app.